Good evening. I'm A.O. Scott of the New York Times, filling in for Charlie Rose, who's away on assignment. It's been over 50 years since the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy shocked a nation and changed the course of history. A new film from director Pablo Larraín tells the story of the assassination and its aftermath from a different point of view. Here's the trailer for Jackie.
People like to believe in fairy tales.
You ready?
Of course.
And you?
I believe that the characters we read about on the page end up being more real than the men who stand beside us. And I'm saying, Jack, can you hear me? Jack, I love you, Jack.
People need their history. They need to know that real men actually lived here.
Well, I've grown accustomed to a great divide between what people believe and what I know to be real.
And how would you like him remembered?
There should be more horses, more soldiers.
Why are you doing this, Mrs. Kennedy?
There's more crying, more cameras.
This is making us look like barbarians.
What's wrong with you? You don't have to do this.
I will march with Jack. Alone if necessary. I'm not the First Lady anymore. I lost track somewhere. What was real? What was performance?
I'm guessing you won't allow me to write any of that.
No. Because I never said that.
Joining me now is the director of the film, Pablo Larraín, and Natalie Portman, who portrays former First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy. I'm pleased to have them both at this table. Welcome. This movie tells or revisits a story, a moment in history that's very familiar. You know, people who were alive then remember exactly where they were. We've seen the Crudup film. So what was the appeal of going back into it, and what did you know, what new dimensions were you looking for?
I'm from Latin America, from Chile, so I'm not directly related to the story. But I was invited to this opportunity to sort of get into this woman's life, I think, which is what the film sort of deals with. More than, you know, there's of course a First Lady side, and there are many Jackies, I guess, in this movie. But the one that really attracted me was the story of a woman, and that ultimately a mother, a story of somebody that was initially protected by a lot of people, and she ended up protecting everybody that's around her. And there's a very beautiful sensibility there, and that I think that's what we try to grab and catch and sort of share with the audience.
And Natalie, what was it like for you? I mean, this is one of the most famous women in American history, and yet she's also somewhat enigmatic. I mean, she's someone who we've seen in the photographs, we've seen in the pink suit and pillbox hat, but who we don't really know. I mean, how did you find your way into the character? How did you discover the dimensions, the kind of intimate and emotional and personal dimensions that we see in the film?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because she was so well known, but I feel like one of the things we know well about her was how private she was and how much she protected her in her life. It's like one of the most famous things about a very famous woman. So it was scary to take on someone that everyone feels like they have a handle on, but of course that there's very little out there. But amazingly, YouTube is this incredible resource now where there's just this sort of treasure trove of old interviews and, you know, even from early campaigns where you can get a sense of when she's a little rougher, less polished, and then of course when she's much more polished in the White House tour, which we recreated, and then of course the books that basically every person in her life wrote about her, from the nanny to the bodyguard to I mean every single person had their own book about Jackie. So there's a lot of clues.
And how important was the voice? I mean, it's very striking in this film, the voice. And I realized watching it that while, you know, her husband's voice, Jack Kennedy's voice, is a voice that you can just hear in your head and kind of sum it up. Her voice is less well known and is also very particular. It's just not a matter of like dialect coaching and getting some kind of regional accent. It's a very, I don't know if anyone talks like that anymore, if very many people ever did.
Right, no, that sort of aspirational mid-Atlantic, you know, movie star kind of accent and breathiness, combined with the sort of like Long Island Bouvier, Grey Gardens, you know, eccentricity. Allows for, I mean, it's pretty fun. I think the first day I did it on set, I saw Pablo go like white.
It's very scary, I have to say, yeah. At the beginning it was very scary. Then we got used to it, but yeah.
Yeah, but then you watch the real thing and you're like,
yeah.
It's.
I mean, how is it to play,
unusual.
to try to play a real person who's so well known, who is such a kind of almost mythological presence in people's lives and in kind of collective national memory? I mean, what are the challenges of going inside and finding the person, the kind of the emotional dimension of that person's experience?
Well, I think Pablo's approach in trying to see her as a human and allowing, not as an icon, and allowing these moments of real imagination and you know, having that sort of license to go places that you wouldn't do with someone you revere necessarily, the questioning of God and, you know, all of these things that we wouldn't necessarily associate immediately with Jackie were helpful in creating more of a round human being. But I think the biggest challenges were probably when we had to really, you know, like recreating the Zapruder film, which we didn't recreate that. Obviously, it's different camera work, of course, but we know exactly what she did facially and physically. Right. And it's this extreme emotional moment, but you're limited by the truth of something that people are very familiar with. So those scenes were much harder than like the walk with the priest, which is, there's a lot of liberty.
Well, and then there are these relationships. I mean, I feel like what you're watching and what's so unusual and powerful, but also disturbing about this movie in a way is you're watching both a public event, a political event, the hugely consequential act of political violence, a political tragedy. No one knows, you know, you have a sense of the kind of the chaos that's swirling around Jackie Kennedy, but it's also, you know, this moment where a woman has lost her husband, and you feel the kind of the collision of the marriage and the political life. I mean, how did you kind of organize those themes in a way, or what? I mean, did you come at it from the Kennedy story, from the public story, and try to go in, or from Jackie's experience and try to build out?
Well, I have to say that we had a great script. This is starting point, essential, by Noah Oppenheim, and then I guess it's how she built this narrative. She sort of protected JFK's legacy and made him somehow a legend. And without kind of knowing it or controlling it, she became an icon. And I guess that's one of the biggest issues and challenges here. You were just talking about that Natalie is very, very well known. And the question is, how long does it take to the audience to assume and to accept that that person is Jackie and it's not Jackie Kennedy, you know? And that's, I guess, what cinema does, and it's very hard to describe because there's a limit on it, and there's an element of mystery on the filmmaking and capturing what Natalie was doing, and that would allow us to create the illusion of what we were looking for. And what I think is very beautiful is that somehow she was trying to organize something that ultimately she wouldn't be able to control. And that lack of control and creates a gap and in between the intention and the result, and that's where we can work and get into, you know, and yeah.
Well, I think we have a clip that illustrates that a little bit, where she's talking about the plans for the funeral, you know, with Jack Valenti, who's played by Max Casella, and I think you see, I think, a little bit what you're talking about there. And talk a little bit about this scene, but also what's going on behind it. I mean, the funeral and the plans for the funeral, which Jackie kind of keeps changing her mind about, is one of the key sort of dramatic central issues in the movie. Talk a little bit about what's going on with her, and what she's trying to do, and how her thinking and her feeling evolve around this.
Yeah, so it's, like you were saying, it's such a crazy thing to be experiencing something so traumatic and devastating and terrifying personally, and also have to worry about a country at the same time. And it's one of the things that's so remarkable about her, is that she was so aware of it immediately from the moment it happened. She refused to take off her suit that was drenched in blood, which is to be in the moment and recognize that your image is important for people and that that's going to help tell the story of what happened, was incredible presence of mind. And then initially she wanted to have this big procession to sort of, you know, sort of mirror what the Lincoln funeral procession was, in order to have a legacy as lasting and as important as Lincoln's. But then, of course, it's terrifying because her husband just got shot on her lap, in that kind of crowd atmosphere. And when we were filming in some of the real places where they eventually did the procession, you see there's just, you know, there's windows and rooftops, and there's just thousands of places for someone wishing.
But she knew what she was doing. That was like, so fascinating. She looked more naive, I guess, but she had an incredible sort of communication and political sense and smell. And I don't know, all these feels that it happened so long ago, and it's not like that. And like Fidel Castro died a couple of days ago, and they were struggling, you know, with them. And what Jackie did was, you know, she would keep the pink dress so people would know what happened, and she would then walk out in open air for 8 city blocks from the White House to the church, and she would be totally exposed, walking in the eyes of the world, and so people would know, and she would know what she was doing, and there's something on that control that I think is interesting, because it feels very natural. But at some point, I think she knew what she was doing, and that's interesting, because it's, I don't know, that's what the movie is about. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's about, because there are these moments where she does seem to be asserting control, and she's very much a political player, you know, dealing with her late husband's brother, and with the Johnsons, and with the whole complicated Washington situation. And there are also other times where she feels so isolated and so alone and so vulnerable, and just like a woman whose husband has suddenly been killed, and there's something about that. The way, I mean, this is a story about private, personal grief, but also about this enormous public event, and about how quickly, I think, people start competing for control of the story. As soon as something happens, it you know, the question becomes, well, whose narrative is this going to be?
What's my role?
And what's my role?
Everybody's role. Yeah.
Let's look at another clip. Speaking of that, with a scene of Jackie and Bobby, who's played by Peter Sarsgaard. This is this movie is I mean, it's about an assassination and a transfer of power, but it's also about a marriage. And what did you find out, or how did you come to think about? I mean, this is a marriage that has been dissected and talked about and written about endlessly in books and articles, and it, you know, we might think we know all the secrets of it. But what do you felt like you learned about Jack and Jackie in the course of making the film?
Well, it's one of the most interesting aspects of the story to me, because she was a woman who really defined herself sort of in that era through her husband, and took that role on for herself, and thought the most important thing in her life was to be her husband's wife and to be the best wife to him as possible. And she says, I mean, we have her in the movie, which is a real quote, that it was their happiest years in the White House, because before she had been seen as this sort of liability to the campaign, that he tried to hide her away because all of her sophistication and chic and everything was sort of alienating to American voters who wished to see her with flour up to her elbows, baking. And then when she got in the White House, she became so popular, and women started emulating her and doing their hair like her and trying to learn French like her. And she set off a craze, which, you know, Pablo found this amazing mannequin, all these Jackie mannequins that he put into the film. And so she was so happy because he finally valued her, and that made her feel better than ever. And then, of course, the assassination, not only does it take away her husband, of course, and the grief with that, but then it takes away her identity as a wife, and then to have to reestablish that, which she does despite her own intentions, you know, to define herself as a wife. She cannot help be herself, and she cannot help but assert her humanity, her independence, her complexity. It's wonderful to see that a woman who has internalized everything that society has given her of what women should be can't help but be incredibly strong and powerful and complicated.
I mean, did you find sometimes that as a woman of the present era that it was hard to get back into that reality and that mindset and that sort of older, more traditional set of gender roles and expectations?
No, because I think we know now more than ever that we live with that very, very deeply still. And I mean, certainly I had my grandmother as that American woman in the same mold that I grew up with, and then you definitely feel it as a woman still, that's very much of value and part of your identity and part of how you see yourself.